Hello, everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the debate from Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I'm going to be going through basically every moment of the debate yesterday. And the debate was June 27th. First, I want to say that I think the moderators did a pretty good job. I didn't see them being biased towards anybody specifically. They did hammer Trump twice in trying to get him to answer two specific questions, which he did answer. I think everything was kept pretty respectful, pretty diplomatic, even though we're talking about Trump and Biden. So I think it was a good debate. It was, we could even say, boring, but it is interesting to analyze the different topics that they were discussing. Now, this can be a very long video, so I'm going to try to make it as short as possible by just basically talking about all the points and making remarks on them. And I'm going to be telling you the topics in order which they spoke about. So before any of this, I want to say that I was listening to a Donald Trump speech, and he was talking about peace through strength, achieving peace through strength. And that's kind of like the whole Republican right-wing ideology, right? And I also want to just mention that Robert F. Kennedy was actually making his own debate where I saw this on YouTube where he was basically listening to the debate live, and then he had a crowd of people that he was like answering to, right? And I thought that was kind of weird. So we know that he's kind of independent. He's kind of doing his own thing, but he's still there, like doing his thing. Okay, so the first topic we started off with was economy. And Biden starts off here. He kind of has like something in his throat. He clears his throat a couple times. And but he starts off, relatively strong. He says that he's gonna do stuff, right, for the economy. But Trump right away counterattacks and he says, "Well, you're already in office, right? Like, what are you talking about? If you're gonna do something, you would have done it already because you're already president, right?" And Biden ultimately blames Trump. He says, well, this is, and I've seen this technique done before where presidents will blame the prior presidents, right? And they'll say that they inherited the economy like that, or they inherited the situation like that, right? Biden makes this point that Trump has done the largest tax cut in history. And he has done it to the rich, $3 trillion or something like that. And they eventually come back to this point. I'll go back to this point later on in the video. And then Trump talks, I've heard him talk twice about this idea, liquid gold. He says, we have liquid gold, which I think he's referring to oil in the United States. Excuse me, but he says there's liquid gold that hasn't been used, right, or sold, that's under our feet. So let me know in the comments what that means, what he's talking about, if the United States really is sitting on liquid gold. And then they talk about, well, Trump talks about Biden's vaccine mandate, right, which is, I think, a very popular topic with Trump. I was hearing the crowd in his speech kind of boo at that, like they're totally against that mandate. I gotta say, in this debate, there's gonna be another debate, but in this debate, they didn't really get into like cultural things. They did get into abortion, but not so much like LGBT rights or trans rights or anything like that, which Trump is kind of like very vocal about, and he has a fan base for that. And while they're talking about this, Trump was trying to push immigration, the topic of immigration, in how Biden is letting in a lot of people, I think like 20 million people through the border illegally and things like that. And the whole time Trump is not looking at Biden. Trump is looking at like in front of him, but Biden literally turns his whole body towards Trump, and he's making these faces the whole time, like, he's looking at him, and then he just kind of looks down and he shakes his head. But you could see the irritation in Biden, right? At one point, I thought he was gonna, tackle Trump or hit him or something. I don't know. You could really see, and I'm gonna talk about this in a moment, about a specific moment that happened in the debate that was very heated, regarding Biden. Okay, so I think Trump may get under Biden's skin because Biden, like I mentioned, makes these faces and he shakes his head all the time while he's talking. Trump doesn't really do this. When Trump is attacked directly by Biden, he'll just kind of smile and, he'll just do this, like, I guess if you believe that to be true, sure, whatever. But Biden does react like very emotionally, right? And I'm going to get into why, but I think it may be because Biden is an emotional sign. Biden is a Scorpio, whereas Donald Trump is an air sign. He's more rational, and he's a Gemini, right? Then they get into abortion. Trump brings up Ronald Reagan, which I thought was kind of interesting because we're going to be seeing the movie on Ronald Reagan's life, which I'm going to be watching in August of this year. And he says, like Ronald Reagan, I believe in the exceptions. And Donald Trump says that the states can decide, right, whatever they want based on abortion. And I'm not really caught up on this topic because they mention Roe v. Wade a lot. I don't really know what happens there. Let me know in the comments if you do. But Biden basically replies saying, no, the states can't decide because that's like saying we should give back the civil rights or the civil rights liberties to the states. So he basically looks at it from a federal perspective, saying the federal government needs to take charge of this, right? That's kind of what I got from that. Let me know if I'm wrong in that. Then Trump says, he brings up the border again. He's constantly bringing up the border and immigration. He says the border is one of the most dangerous borders or places in the world. And then, but they eventually get back into, Trump kind of does this where he's like, it was funny so many times. There's the question on the topic question on the screen, and he's talking about, something else. Well, he's talking about the previous thing that they were talking about, and then they're kind of finishing that up. Biden does that too. But Trump kind of like extends his answer in that sense. They talk about taking the life of the baby in the 9th month or even after birth. This is what Trump says. But Biden, he says only if the woman is going to die, right? Would that be like necessary or would that be done? Eventually around here, Biden kind of loses it. And he kind of like, he does one of those things where he kind of like doesn't know what he's talking about and he just says some random stuff. And that's, I think, what's gone viral, what's really popular right now, where Trump replies like, I don't even know what you said, and I don't even think you know what you said. And that's very popular right now at the moment. But I'm going to be making arguments in favor of Biden because he's not as far gone as people think. And I'm gonna give you a concrete evidential example of this in a moment. Then they get into immigration finally. Biden says the Border Patrol endorsed me, right? And yeah, at this point, Trump is, replying also. And those are the moments where I thought that Biden was going to like rush Trump, because, Biden had this face on him like, I hate you. And then Biden also says that Trump is exaggerating on the idea that terrorists are just flooding through the border. Because he has no data. There's no evidence to back up that claim. And it's very hard to get that evidence because they are illegal after all, and they're kind of like under the system, right? Sort of say. Trump, he gets asked this question, and this is something that he actually doesn't answer. He gets asked that they say, they tell Trump, you've said that if you get elected president, you're going to do the biggest massive deportation in history, right? But what about the people that have like spouses or that are, in the process of getting their citizenship or their green card or whatever? And he doesn't really answer that question. What is he going to do in those cases, right? Because he just talks a big game, right? About how like when he said he was going to build a wall and all this stuff. And then they eventually get into the argument of veterans. And this is funny because they both say, this is like something that happened also with Social Security. They say that they're both good by them, right? Both of them say veterans love me, right? Trump says veterans love him. Biden says veterans love him. And Biden, I think, is kind of pointing more to senior citizens than veterans, whereas Trump is pointing more to the military than veterans, right? So that those are kind of like two different ideas, right? The military and the senior citizens, but they kind of coincide in veterans, right? And this is the part that got really intense. I'm going to put a video of it right here.
And he told me, he said, I don't want to go in there because they're a bunch of losers and suckers. My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
Okay, so if you watch the video, they're talking about suckers and losers, and this is basically the most intense part in the debate. You could see Biden just furious, right? And I think it's because he thought, or it really did happen that Trump spoke about his son, right? And I think about the military, and he calls them suckers and losers, right? So Biden is defending his son, and if you saw the clip just now, he says, my son is not a sucker and loser. You're the sucker and loser, and you could see the anger in his face, right? You could feel that, and Trump is just kind of like, whoa, like, but Trump categorically denies this. He calls the magazine that printed this, I think, like a third-rate magazine. He's like, yeah, I didn't really say that. And they're going to get into the firing of a general later on. But they go back and forth about this, about whether Trump said suckers and losers or not when referring to the military. And then they get into foreign policy. So this is obviously things that have to do with Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Hamas, Palestine. And they say that the moderators say the Ukraine and Russia war has been going on for 3 years. And Putin has said that he will only retreat if he gets to keep the land that he's already taken from Ukraine, plus if Ukraine doesn't go into NATO, right? And they asked Trump, like, do you think those are acceptable terms? And then Trump doesn't answer the question. He gets into blaming Biden. He blames Biden for the war. He blames Biden for the United States embarrassment and their embarrassing retreat from Afghanistan as well. And he says that basically that retreat from Afghanistan made Putin and the other people kind of go like, oh, well, we can do whatever we want now because the US isn't really on guard or isn't really going to do anything about it. So I guess that's why Russia decides to invade Ukraine, and the whole Israel and Palestine conflict, I guess, explodes or whatever. But then he gets asked again, like, are Putin's terms acceptable, right? And he categorically says no, right? The second time he answers the question and he says no, they're not acceptable. It's funny because he blames Biden for giving Zelensky, which is Ukraine's president, so much money, and he says every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he walks out of here with billions of dollars, and he calls him the best salesman ever, which I thought was kind of funny. And then Biden denies this, and he says, well, at first he says that it's important to stop Putin because he will not stop with Ukraine. He will keep going with Poland and the other border countries that border Russia. I was going to say the Soviet Union, but that border Russia. And Biden says that it's not that he's giving people money. It's not that he's giving Zelensky or Israel money. It's that he's providing them with weapons, right? He clarifies that. He says it's not money, it's weapons, right? And then they get into the Middle East and Hamas. Biden has a plan, which he says it's basically it's a 3-stage plan, and it involves ceasefires. And I was listening to an MI6 ex-agent talk about this, and it is kind of like the same idea. They're planning like ceasefires of a couple weeks to get in humanitarian aid, and then based on that, they're trying to reach negotiations and agreements and kind of like make those ceasefires kind of like a thing, right? Where they just basically get peace from that. So yeah, Biden says that he's providing Israel with weapons too, not money. And Biden says that they want to get Hamas like they did bin Laden. Biden says that Biden blames or he basically accuses Trump, and Trump kind of makes this face like, well, if it has to be done. And we have to remember that Trump is a businessman. So Biden accuses Trump of that he says if you're elected president or if he's elected president, Trump is going to pull out of NATO, right? And then he mentions Article 5, where Article 5 is an agreement, I guess, with NATO that an attack on one is an attack on all, right? Like if one country is attacked, everybody's going to jump in, right? Kind of like a gang, I guess. He mentions Poland, the border countries, and Russia, that it's not only Ukraine. And Biden says we have support from Japan, from South Korea. And then Trump talks about NATO, and he says, yeah, NATO, I basically told them pay up because they were trying to get our support for free, Trump says, regarding NATO. And then he says, well, I told them pay up or else we won't help you, right? And he says, as soon as I said that, they started paying up, right? Which I thought was kind of interesting. And because he is a businessman, right? So he would have that approach to negotiations, I guess. And then they bring up January 6th. I think January 6th is very embarrassing for Donald Trump to talk about. He responds by saying, I'll tell you what happened on January 6th. And it's so funny. He says, on January 6th, we had a great border. He says, we were respected globally and we had low taxes, right? So he completely avoids the riot that happened in the Capitol. And then Biden brings up Trump's felonies, and he responds by talking about Biden's son and his felonies and potential future Biden indictments or potential future Biden felonies, right? Future charges for Biden. So they kind of have that. And then Biden responds by saying that Trump had sex with a porn star on the night that his wife was pregnant, which I thought was like a very, ad hominem argument, low blow. But he does say this, and it's kind of funny. He says, you have the morals of an alley cat, which I thought was hilarious. I hadn't heard that expression in a long time. And then Trump just gets into this whole narrative about how Biden is after him, about he's after him to destroy him because he can't beat him fair and square, about how he's a political opponent and he's playing dirty by basically like orchestrating all of the charges that he came out just recently guilty for, right? Trump did. Biden then talks about Charlottesville. He makes like this grand gesture of talking about how when he saw like Nazis coming out of the fields with swastikas, that made him want to run again, because of racism, I guess, and the white supremacy movement. Excuse me. And then he says that, how can you vote for a guy that says that there are nice people in those crowds? Because I guess that's something Trump has said. And I think Trump also said that Hitler did good things or something like that. And then Trump replies by saying that Biden made up the whole Charlottesville story, that's not true. To which like Biden makes this like, gesture like, of outrage. It's kind of funny. And then Biden brings back up again January 6th. He brings up lack of endorsement from Republicans and how he has no vice president. And I thought that was, I was like, damn, like that, those are facts. Like if you look up who Trump's vice president is, TBA, to be announced, like there's no vice president for Trump yet. For Biden is Kamala Harris again. Then there's a commercial break and they start talking about the disappointment that black voters have had with Biden. Biden says this. He says there's more to be done. And he says that inflation is still high, which I thought was a huge mistake, because as soon as Trump gets the opportunity to reply, he says, see, there's high inflation because of him, right? And that was kind of like he got himself into a corner. And I was like, bro, you shouldn't have said that inflation was high. And that's why, black communities were struggling.
You have 49 seconds left. What do you say to black voters who are disappointed with the progress so far?
I say I don't blame them for being disappointed. Inflation is still hurting them badly. For example, I provided for the idea that any black family first-time home buyer should get a $10,000 tax credit to be able to buy their first home so they can get started. I made sure that we're in a situation where all those black families and those black individuals who provided had to take out student loans that were ballooning, that if they were engaged in nursing, doctor, and anything having to do with volunteerism, if they paid their bills for 10 years on their student debt, all the rest was forgiven after 10 years. Millions have benefited from that. And we're going to do a whole lot more for black families.
Thank you, President Trump.
And he caused the inflation. He's blaming inflation, and he's right, it's been very bad. he caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families and just about everybody. It's killing people. They can't buy groceries anymore. They can't. You look at the cost of food where it's doubled and tripled and quadrupled. They can't live. They're not living anymore. He caused this inflation. I gave him a country with essentially no inflation. It was perfect. It was so good. All he had to do is leave it alone. He destroyed it with his Green New scam and all this money that's being thrown out the window.
So yeah, he messed up there. And then Trump like immediately counterattacks, right? Saying, yeah, you caused inflation. And he says this again. Trump says, when I left office, there was virtually no inflation, to which Biden angrily responds, there was no inflation because the economy was flat on its back, which I'm not really sure what that means, but it kind of sounds kind of cool, like flat, like the economy was flat. I was like, what? And then Trump says that the police love him, and Trump says the police love me, and then he accuses Biden of calling black voters, I think if I'm not mistaken, in the 90s, that he called them super predators or something like that, to which Biden makes this expression like of outrage again, right? Then they talk about the climate crisis, about some forest burning or something like that. But again, this was one of the moments where like the topic was climate crisis, and they're still going on about the black voters. Then Trump says he wants clean air and clean water, and that during his presidency, he was actually using all forms of energy. And then they get into this like weird, they do this twice with golf and with who has the biggest heart, which I thought was funny. And they both say they have the biggest heart on stage. They're both like, yeah, I have the biggest heart on stage. And the other one's like, I have the biggest heart on stage. But Trump says that he wants to reduce pollution. Then they get into Social Security and cutting senior citizens' benefits. This is something that they both kind of agreed on, but I think we're kind of all over the place with. Biden makes a very good point where he says that the wealthy people or the rich people need to pay more. And this is actually a left-wing idea, which I'm kind of on board with. I'm like, yeah, well, if you're making more, what the hell? You're paying less taxes. That doesn't make any sense. He says people that make, I think, $100,000 annually or under 400,000 or something like that, they pay 6% in taxes. Whereas people that make more than that, more than $400,000 a year, only pay 1%, right? So they talk about how Biden talks about how he's going to take more money from the rich in taxes, so he's able to pay for Social Security and for benefits for senior citizens. And then Trump makes the argument that it's not so much that, it's that the illegal immigrants are taking the money for Social Security, right? But Biden says that that's how the economy grows. He makes this argument of, and we all know that argument, that immigration ultimately leads to a more prosperous country. I mean, that kind of is how the United States was built, right? With immigrants. And then Biden makes this like statistical point where he says, 58, he says this twice, 58 or 59 scholars have voted Trump the worst US president in history, right? Which I thought was kind of cool how he actually brings out a statistic. We would have to check that. He says, Google it, like look it up. It's a thing. He says Trump can argue against it, but that's a fact. These people have said that, presidential historians, right? Then they get into childcare. But here they start bringing up this topic again about the suckers and losers topic. And Trump says that the general got fired because he didn't do his job, not because he spilled the beans on Trump saying suckers and losers. And then Trump says that he has the capacity and basically like the balls to fire people, whereas Biden, it doesn't. Right? He doesn't fire anybody, which I don't really know what that has to do with anything, but he says that. But this whole part, they're supposed to be talking about childcare, which I thought, again, was funny. Biden says that Trump did nothing in childcare. In the midst of this, and this is the evidential proof that I was talking about, he remembers this. right? They're talking about the general. I mean, they start off the moderators ask the childcare question. They get into the whole general situation, how he got fired, and all of this, and then Biden says Trump did nothing for childcare or virtually nothing for childcare. Um, and I was like, wow, I was impressed because he was able to remember that. And again, that's that Scorpio, right? So I wanted to kind of talk about this a little. I don't know how deep Scorpio rulers, because they are the sign of power, how deep in it they are, right? Like Biden, Mexico's president, AMLO, England's king, he's also a Scorpio. So you have these Scorpios in power, and it's like, what the hell are they really doing? You know, because everybody talks about Biden like, yeah, he's a fool, whatever. But it's like the man's president. You know, how do you achieve that being a fool? You know, you know, so that's like food for thought. And then Trump says this: if I'm given another 4 years, I'll be the best president, which I thought was kind of like blowing himself up. Like, what do you mean the best out of like the 50 that have been presidents, or are you saying of the world and the history? I don't know. That would be kind of hard to achieve, but okay. And they keep going back and forth about best, worst, who's the best, who's the worst. You know, just blaming each other like you're the worst and I'm the best. And they both say that, which I thought was funny. And they talk about something which I thought was very interesting, the tariffs. The tariffs that basically Trump says that he's going to impose on importation, right? Basically with China. He says we're going to charge China more to import their products or something like that, right? Tariffs are the tax of importation, where like the whole free trade agreement is based on not charging that, on not charging tax, right? And he makes a good point. He says that Biden counterattacks by saying that really it's going to be the people, or I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but he says it's the people that are ultimately going to pay this with, I think, a 2,500 increase annually, because they're going to have to pay more for food, more for service, or I think for food and for products that are imported from China. So it's not so much that the Chinese are affected because or people that are importing into the United States, countries that import into the United States, because if they get taxed more, they're just going to increase, you know, the price of their products. And then the people are going to have to pay more for the products, right? But he says, oh no, I skipped something. I was in childcare. Yeah, he says he remembers that. They go back and forth about, oh yeah. And then the tariffs, yes, Biden says the tariffs will be paid by the common people because they will be paid for it by food, right? Which I thought was like a good argument. Then they get into the opioid crisis. In both terms, they have gone up. The mediators say, like, both, you know, Trump was president first and then Biden, and in both terms they have gone up. So what are you guys going to do about it? And then and this is the part where they're still on about the tariffs, and Trump begins by saying that Biden never took away the tariffs because it's too much money, which Biden basically doesn't reply, which I was like, oh, well, you're seeing it's a bad thing for the people, but yeah, you're not doing anything about it. So I'm kind of like, you know. And then they get into the opioid crisis. Basically, Trump says he has dogs and Biden says he has machines or something like that. And they both have a plan to detect drugs. And they get into the topic of hostages, how Trump has rescued hostages while he was president, I think, by virtually paying nothing, while Biden has paid like $6 billion. And currently, I think there's a president hostage from the Wall Street. I think Russia has them or something like that. Okay, and then they get into the age thing. So Biden first answers this question, you know, like both of you are going to be 80 by the time you finish office, whichever one of you gets elected. They're basically the same age. They're almost 80, both of them. No, I think Biden is already 80. And Biden starts off by saying, well, first I was the youngest member in Congress, and now I'm the oldest, you know, so he's just kind of like whatever. And then he says, we're the most progressive country, whereas Trump says we're a failing nation. So he kind of makes this notion of like, you know, we're good, like don't worry about it. And Trump, you know, he talks about how he aced 2 cognitive tests. He says that Biden probably couldn't even get past the first questions. He says that he has regular physical exams, that he's in good health, that he plays golf. And this is the moment where I think it's one of the funniest, that they start like basically talking about golf and who's better at golf. I thought it was hilarious. Trump says that he actually looks or feels lighter than 20 or 25 or 30 years ago. And I think Trump challenges Biden to like a golf match, and they start talking terms, like golf terms. And then Biden responds, and that's the moment where like one of the only moments, or the only moment where they both overlap and they're both talking at the same time about who's better at golf. Hilarious. And then the moderator just steps in, and it's kind of like, all right, guys, like, let's get past that. The moderators, I think, did a very good job of keeping everything as neutral as they could. And I think they did a really good job at just like moving everything along, like, okay, you said whatever, you guys feel whatever, let's move on, keeping everything going. And then for this, Biden says something which I thought was kind of interesting. He says, take a look regarding Trump. He says, take a look at what he says and what he is, right? Which is basically like what he says is one thing and what he is another thing, which I thought was like an interesting thing to say. And then they talk about whether Trump will accept defeat, making reference again to January 6th. And Trump kind of isn't really like answering this question directly. He says, obviously, or he says, I shouldn't even have to answer this. That's just common sense. He says political violence is not acceptable. He doesn't say that explicitly. I'm just paraphrasing. But he says something along the lines of that. And then Trump says that Biden will drive us to World War III. He says that the United States, he says that the world doesn't respect or fear the United States or Biden. And then Trump says that a lot has been lost due to Russia's attack, like morale, I'm guessing, right, in the United States or in the world. But he does say that if the election is fair and equal, he'll accept defeat, right? And he kind of makes this reference about how he makes this reference like twice or three times, how he says he would rather be somewhere else relaxing. He could be at one of his like fancy homes or something like that, doing something else. And that I guess he would step down. Biden says that when Trump lost in 2020, he continued to do appeals and spread misinformation about how there was fraud, election fraud, which I guess there was never any proof. And he basically ends by saying that Trump is a whiner. And I was like, oh, and then we take a commercial break, right? I thought Biden was kind of, he's slow, but he's there. I mean, he like the new, like, and if you watch the news is only like a 10-second clip of him just mumbling, and then you're like, oh yeah, or of him like spilling his ice cream or falling off his bike. But if you like watch the whole debate, you'll see that he has like attacks, right? They both have attacks, right? Okay, so then they give their closing statements. First, it's Biden. He talks about having a fair tax system, the $400,000 a year people under and below, right? And not increasing taxes for the people that are under that mark. He talks about tax more with a 10% tariff. I don't really know why I wrote that. If someone wants to let me know what that was about. He talks about senior citizens and helping them, childcare, fighting inflation. And Trump finishes off by saying that Biden is a complainer. Oh, and I was going to talk about this. There are actually like 2 moments or 3 where like I saw Biden make a reference to something. I think like Biden stumbled with his words, but he says something along the lines of like, I just spoke with this person on this topic and this mother of 2 or something like that. And like a couple exchanges after that, Trump makes a reference to something like that. Like I spoke to a mother of, so I kind of thought like how much of what Biden is saying is Trump like copying, because then for his closing statement, Trump says that Biden is a complainer. And I was like, a complainer? Isn't that like a whiner? Like, what's really the difference? So he's just kind of like throwing back what he threw at him. He talks about immigration, about how Ukraine should have never happened, how the whole country is exploding because they don't respect Biden throughout the world. He talks about the soldiers and the military. He talks about them a lot, and about how the US is currently a failing nation and like never again, and making America great again, right? Which is like his thing. And then everything ends. So my conclusive remarks from this debate, I hope I gave you like a thorough overview of everything that happened in about 30 minutes. I think Biden can hold his own. There's a reason why he's president. And maybe it's because he's a Scorpio. Trump did attack, but I saw a weakness in his argument, which was that he would repeat things a lot, right? Like he would make a statement on immigration and then he would make the same statement on immigration. And I guess this is a political strategy because it kind of drives the message home. Like, repetition is the mother of memory, they say. But Biden wasn't really repeating things. He would just his weakness is that he looks bad, right? He'll stumble, he'll mumble, he'll talk irrationally at times, right? And I don't know how much of that is his personality and how much of it is like because he may have a mental thing or condition, or because of age, right? Because Trump and him are like basically the same age. But I did think the moment that Biden mentioned inflation, he set himself back, right? And Trump went after him on that, which I thought was a brilliant moment by Trump. I mean, I saw that moment when Biden said that, but I didn't really think much of it. And then when Trump had his turn and he counterattacks with like, see, inflation is high. He just said it and he's the president. I was like, oh, that was a thing. And I would think the highlight was that moment where he calls Trump a sucker and a loser. I thought that was like highly emotional. And the whole time I was just like, man, like Biden's gonna, like Trump gets under Biden's skin, I think. But I guess he's able to control himself. After all, Scorpios do have that control. So let me know what you think about this video I just made. If you watched the review also, let me know your comments. And that's all I got for this video. So I'll see you in the next one, all right? Peace.